On Christmas morning, while families everywhere were gathering around trees and sharing laughter, I sat alone in my kitchen staring at the phone call that changed everything. My own son told me I wasn't welcome at his home for Christmas, all because his wife's parents didn't want me there. What he didn't know was that for 5 years, every smile under his roof was paid for by me. My name is Mary, and this is the story of how betrayal can turn even the softest mother into someone unrecognizable. I never thought I'd be here, sitting across from myself in a mirror and wondering how it all went so wrong. I raised my son Daniel on love. Nothing fancy, nothing privileged, just love. After his father passed away, my husband John, gone too young from a heart attack, I told myself that no matter how much pain I carried, I'd carry double for Daniel if it meant he could live without feeling the weight of the world pressing him down. So, when Daniel married Julia, I welcomed her. I welcomed her with open arms. I told her she was family, and family is everything. That's what I believed back then. But as the years went on, I began to notice little things. Tiny cuts that didn't bleed right away, but left bruises deep inside. She came from a different world. Her parents, the Calderons, had money, refinement, the kind of cold elegance that looked down on women like me. They never said it out loud at first, but I could see it in their eyes. To them, I was a widow from the working class, someone who scraped by, someone who didn't belong at their polished dinner tables with crystal glasses and soft music in the background. But Daniel was my son, and he was happy, or at least I thought he was. So I swallowed my pride. I smiled through the slights, I laughed at the jokes that weren't funny, and I made sure to never cause a scene, because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We put our children's happiness before our own. We make sacrifices they'll never even see. And oh, did I sacrifice. After John passed, I had his life insurance, a modest amount that was supposed to be my cushion, my safety net for old age. I used that money, every dollar, to make sure Daniel and Julia could have the home they dreamed of. A little white house with blue shutters, and a yard where their daughter, my granddaughter Lily, could one day play. I never told anyone, not even Daniel, the full extent of what I was doing. Quietly, I set up automatic payments on their mortgage. Quietly, I covered their bills when they were behind. Quietly, I poured not only money, but years of my life into holding up the walls of their home. Over 5 years, I paid $237,000. Do you hear that number? It's staggering. And every penny of it came from me, a mother who didn't think twice about giving everything because I thought in the end I would always have a place in my son's heart. But on that Christmas morning, the illusion shattered. Daniel's voice on the phone was cold, clipped. "Mom, listen, Julia's parents are coming for Christmas this year, and they're not really comfortable with you being here. It's just better if you don't come. We'll celebrate another time, I promise." I sat there in silence, the cheap linoleum of my kitchen floor blurring under the tears I refused to let fall. Another time? Another time, as if Christmas was just some replaceable day on the calendar, as if my presence was a stain on their perfect holiday photo. I asked him, my voice trembling, "Daniel, after everything I've done for you, you're telling me I'm not welcome in your own home?" He hesitated. "Mom, it's not about that. You know Julia's parents. They just have certain expectations. They're different from you. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Different from me. That phrase cut deeper than he realized. Different? meant better. Different meant cleaner, richer, more worthy of a chair at his table. And me? I was the shadow, the extra, the embarrassment. Do you know what it feels like to suddenly realize you're the outsider in your own family? It's like drowning in a familiar ocean. You know every wave, every current, and yet suddenly you're being pulled under as if you never belonged there at all. I hung up the phone and sat there, staring at the walls of my little house. And then it hit me like a freight train. All these years, while I was living small, eating soup 3 nights in a row, patching the same coat because I couldn't afford a new one, I was financing their happiness. They were laughing in a house I bought for them, eating meals I made possible, hosting parties with wine I might as well have poured into their glasses myself. And now, I wasn't good enough for Christmas. I wish I could tell you I stood up right then and I slammed the phone down and marched over to give them a piece of my mind. But I didn't. Not yet. Because the hurt was too raw, too heavy. I curled into myself, rocking like a child, whispering, "Why, Daniel? Why?" The truth is, betrayal doesn't always make you angry at first. Sometimes it makes you small. Sometimes it makes you question every choice you ever made, every sacrifice you thought was worth it. I thought maybe I had failed as a mother. Maybe I gave too much, or maybe I didn't give the right way. But then as the hours passed, that sorrow began to harden. Like ice forming on a lake, my grief began to freeze into something sharper, something dangerous. Because I realized if I was invisible to them, then I had the power to disappear in more ways than one. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have swallowed your pride and begged for a seat at that table, knowing you were the one who bought it in the first place? Or would you have started thinking about what life looks like when you finally stop letting people bleed you dry? I'll be honest, I wasn't ready to talk about revenge yet. Not then. But the seed had been planted. That Christmas morning, while the Calderons were probably toasting champagne and Julia was showing off her perfect decorations, I made a quiet phone call of my own. Not to my son, not to beg or plead. No. I called the bank, and with a calmness that even surprised me, I said, "Cancel the automatic mortgage payments. Effective immediately."
The woman on the other end asked, "Are you sure, ma'am? This will put the account holder in default if payments are not made." And I smiled, actually smiled for the first time that day. Yes, I'm sure. For 5 years, I had been the invisible hand holding up their castle. But castles built on borrowed kindness are fragile. Remove one stone and the whole thing begins to crumble. And oh, it was going to crumble. The strange thing about cutting the cord is that no one notices it first. Like a clock that's been unplugged, it still ticks for a while before the silence sets in. When I canceled those payments, I knew it would take weeks before Daniel and Julia realized, but in the meantime, something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Still, I didn't get far before the phone calls started. Not from Daniel. Oh no, he never had the spine for confrontation. But from Julia. Always Julia. The first one came 2 days after Christmas. I remember because I was still putting away the leftover pie I'd baked for no one but myself. The phone rang, and her name lit up the screen like a warning siren. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some part of me wanted to hear what excuse she'd spin. "Mary," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I need a huge favor. My parents are flying in tomorrow, and it would just mean so much if you could pick them up from the airport." I nearly laughed. Pick them up? The same parents who wrinkled their noses when I brought homemade tamales last year? Who whispered behind their wine glasses like I couldn't hear them? The same people who had essentially ordered my exile from Christmas? "Julia," I said slowly, You do remember I wasn't invited to your Christmas dinner, right? And now you want me to play chauffeur for the people who took my place? She sighed dramatically, the way only people born into comfort can. Mary, don't make this about you. This is about family. My parents are family now, too. That word, family, made my blood boil. Then perhaps they should rely on their family for a ride. I'm not available. Her voice hardened. Mary, you're being unreasonable. My parents are elderly, and you know traffic this time of year is terrible. Don't you care at all? I almost snapped right then, but I held myself steady. There's a power in silence, in refusing to dance to someone else's tune. I said, I'm not available, Julia. Goodbye. And I hung up before she could say another word. It was the first time in years I'd said no. And God, it felt good. But Julia wasn't the type to take no gracefully. The next day, when I didn't show up at the airport, they came to me. Oh yes, they showed up on my doorstep, her parents standing there in their tailored coats, scowling like kings denied their throne. Julia was with them, of course, her arms crossed, her lips twisted in that condescending smirk I'd come to know too well. Mary, her father barked before I could even say hello. Do you have any idea how disrespectful it is to leave us stranded like that? I leaned against the doorframe, calm as ever. Do you have any idea how disrespectful it is to tell a mother she's not welcome at her own son's Christmas dinner? The silence that followed was delicious. Julia's cheeks flushed red. Her mother sputtered something about standards and expectations, but I didn't let them finish. You think you're better than me, I said flatly. Because you have money, because you speak softly and wear pearls? But tell me, how much of your daughter's perfect life did you pay for? Because I've spent the last 5 years quietly keeping a roof over their heads while you sat on your high horse. You look down on me, but without me, they'd have nothing. Their eyes widened, shocked. Julia hissed, Mom, you didn't have to. Don't you dare call me Mom, I cut her off. You don't get that word. Not from me. I slammed the door in their faces. My hands shook after, but it wasn't from fear. It was adrenaline. For once, I wasn't the doormat. For once, I was standing on solid ground. Of course, word got back to Daniel. He called that night, sounding panicked, torn between loyalty to his wife and guilt for his mother. Mom, Julia says you embarrassed her parents today. What happened? I almost laughed at how pathetic he sounded. What happened is I stopped letting people walk all over me. Daniel, do you even realize how much I've given you? Do you know who's been paying your mortgage all these years? There was a long pause. What do you mean?
I felt the weight of the secret lifting as I said it out loud for the first time. $237,000. That's how much I've spent to keep you and Julia living comfortably while I lived small. I used your father's life insurance. I used my savings. And for what? To be told I'm not welcome in my own family? His voice cracked. Mom, I didn't know. Julia never... She said the bank helped us restructure. And there it was. The lies. Julia had twisted the truth, had let him believe their comfortable life was all thanks to some miracle arrangement, while I bled myself dry in silence. That night, as I lay in bed, something became clear. This wasn't just about being excluded from Christmas. This was about being erased, rewritten out of my own son's life, replaced by people who had done nothing but sneer at me. That's when the anger fully bloomed. That's when the word revenge stopped feeling like a distant possibility and started tasting like a promise. But revenge isn't taken in one blow. It has to be crafted step by step, like a puzzle only you know the picture to. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I wasn't going to fight them on their terms. No, I was going to let the truth cold, undeniable truth be the blade they fell on themselves. And I knew exactly where to begin. Tell me honestly, if you were me, would you have told your son everything right then? Or would you have waited? Let the lies unravel. Let the weight of silence crush them until the perfect moment came to pull the rug out completely. Because me? I chose patience. And that patience would become their undoing. I should have known Julia wouldn't let things rest after that confrontation. People like her don't handle defiance well. They thrive on control, on making sure their version of the story is the only one anyone ever hears. And when you stand in their way, they don't just push back. They try to erase you completely. It started small, little whispers around town, things that got back to me through neighbors and friends at church, comments about me being difficult, unstable, jealous of Julia and Daniel's success. At first, I brushed it off. Let them talk, I thought. Words are just air. But then the newspaper article appeared. Yes, a whole article in the local paper written by some two-bit columnist with just enough pull to twist half-truths into a public execution. The headline burned itself into my memory. Local widow alienates family during the holidays. The piece painted me as bitter, controlling, even cruel. It claimed I refused to support my son and his wife out of spite. It even hinted I had a drinking problem. A vile little lie Julia must have fed them to make me look like some lonely, unstable woman spiraling out of control. I remember staring at that article, my hands shaking, rage boiling up until I thought I'd explode. But instead of exploding, I felt something else. Clarity. You see, up until then, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was too sensitive. But that article told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just pushing me out. They were rewriting me into a villain in my own community. They were making sure if I ever dared to stand up, no one would believe me. That's when I stopped thinking like a mother and started thinking like a strategist. If Julia and her family wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. They had arrogance, but I had patience. And patience, my friends, is far deadlier. So I began digging. Quietly. Carefully, in the hours when no one was paying attention. I went back through years of bank statements, pulling proof of every mortgage payment I had made. I organized receipts from repairs, from renovations, from bills I'd quietly covered when Daniel and Julia forgot. I had an entire binder of evidence before the week was over. And then I got creative. Julia lived on social media, plastering their perfect life all over the internet. Every post was a clue, a breadcrumb she didn't even realize she was leaving behind. Photos of trips they could never have afforded on their own, designer handbags, weekend getaways, all of it lined up perfectly with the dates of my payments. I cross-referenced everything, made notes, connected dots. I wasn't just collecting proof. I was building a weapon. And when I worked, the calls from Daniel continued. He was confused, caught between me and Julia, trying to make sense of who to believe. I could hear the strain in his voice, the way he tiptoed around me as if I might shatter. "Mom, Julia says you're making things up. She says the payments came from some bank restructuring deal, not you." I almost laughed. "Daniel, sweetheart, banks don't give away free money. Open your eyes. Look around your house. Who do you think paid for the new kitchen? Who kept the lights on when you both lost work during the pandemic? Do you think magic paid those bills?" But I didn't give him the binder. Not yet. No, I wasn't ready. Because if I gave him everything too soon, Julia would twist it, find a way to spin it, and Daniel, my poor son, he'd probably believe her. I needed a stage, in audience, somewhere Julia and her family couldn't control the narrative, couldn't lie their way out.
And I knew just when that opportunity would come. Christmas Eve, their big annual dinner, the one they hosted for friends, extended family, anyone important enough to impress. The Calderones prided themselves on those dinners. Polished silver, catered meals, their chance to show the world how refined and generous they were. That was where I'd strike. But revenge isn't only about the final blow. It's about savoring the build-up, setting every piece in place until the trap snaps shut. And as I waited, as I organized my evidence and rehearsed what I would say, I let them keep underestimating me. Julia, in her arrogance, thought I was finished. The article, the gossip, the constant jabs, they all made her believe I'd crawl back, beg forgiveness, plead for scraps at their table. That's what people like her expect. They can't imagine someone like me having the strength to fight back. But I wasn't fighting with fists or words. I was fighting with truth. And truth, when you've got nothing left to lose, is the sharpest blade of all. Tell me, have you ever kept a secret so powerful you could feel it humming inside you like a live wire, just waiting for the right moment to release? That's what it felt like, carrying that binder. Every page was a bullet in the chamber, every receipt a nail in the coffin. And I promised myself, when the moment came, I wouldn't hesitate. So I waited, quietly smiling every time another rumor floated back to me. Every time Julia's parents strutted around town like victors, they thought they'd won. But the thing about people who build their lives on lies is that they forget what happens when the truth walks in the door. And on Christmas Eve, I was going to walk through that door with the storm behind me. Christmas Eve came faster than I expected. For everyone else, it was a night of warmth, music, and laughter. For me, it was the night I walked into the lion's den with the truth like a weapon strapped to my chest. I'll admit I almost lost my nerve. As I stood outside their house, staring up at the glowing windows, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter spilling into the night, my hands trembled. It would have been so easy to turn around, to let them have their dinner and their illusions, but then I thought of all the nights I spent alone, eating soup while they feasted. I thought of John, my late husband, whose life insurance had been drained to give them everything they flaunted. I thought of Lily, my granddaughter, who would grow up never knowing her grandmother if I let Julia erase me completely. And just like that, my spine straightened. This wasn't about nerves anymore. This was about justice. I pushed the door open. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward me. Julia's painted smile faltering, Daniel's eyes widening, the Calderones stiffening like they'd just seen a ghost walk in. "Mary," Julia hissed, her voice sharp as broken glass. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped fully into the room, the weight of my binder heavy in my hands. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their curiosity sparking as they realized something was about to happen. You could feel the tension, thick as smoke, filling every corner of that polished dining room. "I came," I said finally, my voice steady, "to give gifts." I walked around the table, slowly, deliberately, handing each guest a manila envelope. Daniel tried to stop me, stammering, "Mom, please, don't." But I brushed past him. When I finished, every single person at that table had an envelope in front of them. Julia's laugh was high-pitched and brittle. "What is this? Another one of your dramatics?" "Open them," I said simply. One by one, the guests did, and one by one, their faces changed. Shock, confusion, disbelief. Inside each envelope was a copy of my evidence. Bank statements, receipts, printouts of social media posts matched with dates of mortgage payments, proof that for 5 long years I had been the invisible foundation of Daniel and Julia's perfect life. Gasps filled the room. Someone muttered, "My God." Another guest whispered, "She paid for everything." Daniel's hands shook as he flipped through his copy. His face went pale. Mom, all of this is true? Yes, I said quietly, locking eyes with him. Every penny, every sacrifice. And not once did I ask for thanks. But this Christmas, your wife's parents decided I wasn't good enough to share a table in the house I paid for. And Julia, you let him believe it was the bank. You let him believe in lies. The room erupted. Julia's parents sputtered, red-faced, trying to insist this was a misunderstanding, but the evidence was undeniable. The guests weren't looking at me anymore. They were staring at Julia, and she knew it. "Don't you see what she's doing?" Julia shrieked, her mask cracking. "She's trying to ruin us. She's jealous. She's bitter." "Jealous?" I cut in, my voice sharp as steel. "I gave you everything. I starved myself so you could eat. I lived small so you could live large. And when I asked for nothing but a chair at your table, you shoved me out the door. That's not jealousy, Julia. That's betrayal." For the first time, Julia had no words. Her face twisted with fury, but she couldn't fight the truth sitting in black and white on that table. And Daniel, my son, my sweet blind son, looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. I thought—" "I know. I know you didn't. That's why this isn't about punishing you. But you need to see what's been happening. You need to understand what's been taken from me and from you." The guests began to murmur. Some excused themselves, uncomfortable with the spectacle. Others stayed, their eyes hungry, eager to watch the downfall of a family they'd once admired. Because isn't that human nature? To feast on scandal the way we feast on turkey and wine? Julia snapped then, grabbing the binder from my hands and flinging it across the room, pages scattered like snow, fluttering to the floor. She screamed, "You ruined everything! Do you hear me? Everything!" I looked her dead in the eye. "No, Julia, I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped saving you. And now you get to see what life looks like without me holding you up." Silence fell. A heavy, suffocating silence. Daniel sat with his head in his hands. Julia's parents looked like they'd swallowed poison. And me? For the first time in years, I felt free. I left then. I didn't wait for apologies, didn't wait for explanations. I walked out into the cold night, the sound of chaos erupting behind me. Voices raised, accusations flying, the perfect facade of their world crumbling brick by brick. And as I walked down the snowy street, I asked myself, what would you have done? Would you have burned the whole house down, or would you have done what I did? Simply pulled your support and let the fire start on its own. Because that's the thing about revenge. Sometimes you don't have to light the match. Sometimes all you have to do is stop carrying the weight, and the people who used you will collapse under their own lies. The days after that Christmas Eve were eerily quiet. No phone calls, no texts. Not from Daniel, not from Julia, not from anyone who had been at that table. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the pull of obligation. No scrambling to pay bills that weren't mine, no worrying if my son would have food on his plate. The silence wasn't lonely, it was freedom. Word traveled quickly, as it always does in families and neighborhoods like ours. The Calderans had built a reputation on appearances, on the illusion of control and perfection. But once my evidence spread, the cracks widened. People who had once looked at them with admiration now whispered when they walked by. Julia's parents avoided me entirely, but that was fine. They'd made their choice when they labeled me unworthy. The mortgage company wasn't so forgiving. Without my steady payments, the house Daniel and Julia had taken for granted was suddenly fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. Within 3 months, foreclosure notices began piling up. I heard about it from a neighbor who couldn't wait to tell me, almost gleeful in their delivery. I didn't smile, didn't laugh, but inside there was a strange satisfaction. Not because I wanted my son homeless, but because for once he would have to face the consequences of living in lies. Julia fought, of course. She pleaded with her parents for help, but their pride wouldn't let them cover a mess they'd mocked me for holding together. She tried to take on extra work, but the truth is, she'd never learned how to survive without someone carrying the weight. And slowly, her bitterness grew. The fights between her and Daniel weren't whispers anymore. They were loud enough that neighbors could hear them through the walls. And Daniel, my son, he came to me one rainy evening, 3 months after that Christmas. He looked like a man broken in half, eyes hollow, shoulders slumped, his clothes hanging loose as if even food had become scarce. When I opened the door, he stood there for a long moment, unable to speak. Then he fell to his knees right on my porch and sobbed. "Mom," he choked, "I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know how much you were doing. I let Julia poison me against you, and I didn't see it. I let their parents call you names, let them keep you out, and all that time you were saving me from drowning. I don't deserve your forgiveness." Hearing my son like that broke something inside me, but not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't the pain of betrayal anymore. It was the grief of wasted years. I knelt beside him, pulled his face up to mine, and said, "Daniel, I don't need your forgiveness, and you don't need mine. What we both need is the truth. And now you have it. That's enough." He begged me to help again, to step back in and save the house. But I shook my head. "No, Daniel, that chapter is over. You have to learn what it means to stand on your own. I can't be your foundation anymore. It nearly destroyed me once. I won't let it again." He cried harder, and I held him, but I stayed firm. Love doesn't mean endless sacrifice. Love sometimes means letting go. By summer, the house was gone. Julia left soon after, unable to face the humiliation. I wasn't surprised. She'd never loved Daniel the way a wife should, only the comfort he gave her, while I carried the burden. When the comfort vanished, so did she. Daniel moved into a small apartment not far from me. It wasn't much, but it was his. For the first time, he paid his own bills. He cooked his own meals. And though he struggled, I could see something shift in him, a kind of humility that had been missing for years. We met for dinner once a week. No money passed between us, no unspoken debts. Just a mother and son rebuilding something fragile but real. And me? I finally lived. I took long walks in the park without worrying about bills piling up. I joined a small book club at the library, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I laughed more, slept deeper, and even planted a garden in my backyard, where each bloom reminded me of resilience. Sometimes I'd think back to that Christmas Eve, to the look on Julia's face when her mask shattered. People asked me if I regretted it, if exposing them in front of everyone was too harsh. But here's the truth. When you've been erased, humiliated, and used, telling your story isn't cruelty. It's survival. I don't know where Julia is now, and I don't care. As for Daniel, I still love him with all my heart. A mother's love doesn't vanish, but now it's a love with boundaries, a love that doesn't bleed me dry. So here's my final thought for anyone listening. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never mistake a mother's sacrifice for endless availability. Because when the day comes that she stops carrying you, you'll realize just how much of your world was built on her shoulders. And if you're someone like me, someone who gave and gave until there was nothing left, remember this: you have the right to stop. You have the right to take your life back. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't burning someone else's house down. It's walking away, letting the truth speak louder than you ever could, and finally choosing yourself. That Christmas, they thought they'd erased me. Instead, I made sure they'd never forget my name.